So, welcome everybody. It's a bit of a gloomy day out there today, isn't it? Oy, oy, oy. I'm Mike Cartoscelli. I'm the current Chief Operating Officer for Persistent Security Industries. We do breach and attack simulation stuff, pretty cool. But formerly, and in a past life, I was the Chief Information Officer for Bank of New York Mellon here in Ireland. So our panel today is everyday automation, right? It's how generative AI is impacting our lives. And with me on stage are some esteemed colleagues. We have Roisin Kelly from Coca-Cola Group. We have Tony Clarke from Icon. And we have Derek Wilson from Origin. So right before I'm going to read out the first question, and then I'll call on you folks. Give me a quick little bio about yourself and why it kind of impacts you and why you care. And I'm going to sit down and we'll kick off here. So thank you all for joining me this morning and on stage today. And our first question today is, let's start about sharing about how we're currently utilizing AI in our work lives, in our daily lives, and what's been positive, what's been present, so I'm going to kind of work this way and come back. So I'm going to start off with Roisin.
Great. Well, first of all, good morning, everybody. And just to, I suppose, why did I get asked to do this? I am working for the Coca-Cola company, so not the bottling group, but we do work very closely with our bottling partners. And in Coca-Cola, we're lucky enough to have had an enterprise-wide instance of ChatGPT for a full year now. So it was a strategic decision by actually our CEO, James Quincy, that he wanted to make this investment. And he pretty much rang up the CIO and said, I need you to sign an NDA. And then 10 minutes later, he called back and said, right, this is what I need you to do. You need to implement this enterprise-wide. So we're a year in to everybody in the company having access to that. So it's been an interesting opportunity within digital services to be the coach and be the business partner for so many parts of the business as they've been through that journey. I personally work in the customer and commercial space, so I'll talk a bit about what we've done in that area. We have put together a framework for, I suppose it's a blessing and a curse having that enterprise-wide instance so early, because in a way it's a gift and it's a competitive advantage, but in another case, it's there, not everybody's been trained on it, it's pretty loose as to kind of what the options are. So we did put a framework around it in terms of, helping people to think about how they could best leverage it. So the use case framework was essentially the following. Number one, looking at product innovations. So how could we scan the world to identify new flavors, new consumer opportunities, new occasions for our products? Second was creating unique consumer experiences, so hyper-personalized experiences for our customers to really become embedded in our brand. So for example, Coke Studio is a music experience for all of our consumers, and using AI to drive some of that would be one of the instances. Third one is in the marketing and commercial space, marketing commercial acceleration, and the fourth is enterprise expert agent. So essentially that kind of covers the range of areas we were working in. If it's okay, what I'll do is I'll talk about a couple of the examples that we've used, particularly in the commercial space. If now's a good time, or do you want to?
We'll circle back at the end of the question.
We'll circle back, because I think what we have is two examples, but I want to give the other guys a chance to speak. One particularly in revenue growth management, which we could share as a use case, and the second one is improving our forecasting capabilities and really getting those activated. So we'll talk about those in a second.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting one, because I think quite a lot of folks in here may not realize the depth that AI can take different parts of the business to. So I think that's pretty cool. Tony.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everyone. So my name's Tony Clarke. I'm SVP for Digital Operations, or what you might know as IT Operations in Icon. So Icon's a clinical research organization. We essentially run clinical trials globally for almost all of the major pharmaceutical and biotech organizations. So if you received a Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, Icon was the organization that ran the trials. So in terms of AI, we probably had a reasonable kind of starting position because we're a regulated organization, so we follow a lot of process. We have a lot of standard operating procedures, and given what we do as an organization, we're I suppose, very data savvy. So we have data management teams, we have teams of biostatisticians whose full-time job is to work on data as part of clinical trials and package data in a way that it can be submitted to regulators. So I guess we had a good kind of start and position in terms of some of the maybe prerequisites to leverage AI. I'd say that we're, given what we do, we're risk averse. It's not that we would kind of necessarily move quickly into new technologies, but like all organizations, we do want to leverage the benefits, and we certainly, as a service-based organization, essentially, we want to be efficient in how we provide our services. So we have a number of initiatives leveraging generative AI. Similar to Roisin, we have an enterprise-wide GPT type model. Not as far along as you. We've out to the organization for about 6 months or so, which certainly opened our eyes a little bit as well, because it was, like Roisin mentioned, a little bit of a step into the unknown, certainly in terms of services that we provided to all employees prior to that. So we've seen some interesting ways people have used generative AI just in their everyday jobs that we probably wouldn't have anticipated. Then we have some large language models dedicated to specific kind of use cases. So what we realized was that we kind of needed, I guess, in our organization to have almost 2 teams. So we have what's called a data and applied innovation team, who are really looking at leveraging AI and have been for a number of years beyond even generative AI on solving, I suppose, specific problems in the context of clinical trials and industry type problems. How do we recruit patients faster onto clinical trials? How do we leverage data, concepts like digital twins? So they're looking at, I suppose, the business side. And then my team, we're looking at technology that's broadly applicable to all employees. So we have large language models to help people navigate our IT ecosystem, what we internally call our digital map. And we have, I suppose, a pipeline now for about the next 12 to 18 months on other initiatives, just really aimed at helping our workforce, helping our staff navigate the organization better or do their jobs more effectively.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Derek.
Good morning. I'm Derek Wilson, CIO with Origin Enterprises. Origin Enterprises is I won't go into everything we do, but primarily we're an agricultural organization. So we advise farmers, arable sector predominantly, on what to grow and how to achieve maximum yield and how to do that in a sustainable way. We've been using AI and specifically ML certainly for over a decade. We look at this in sort of 3 ways. We help farmers plan what they're going to do. We help them then with prescriptions, particularly as the crop emerges from the ground, or what interventions to make. And then we help them predict what's going to happen into the future. And we use AI and ML across those 3 objectives. We use a lot of satellite imagery as a data source, increasingly, and I suppose a lot of the buzz in agriculture now is around drones, and we do have an investment in a drone company, so we use a lot of drone imagery. We use a lot of IoT sensors, but also a lot of historical data, particularly around soil health, and about farming practices and what the farmer, he or she, has done on farm in the past. And that helps, as I said, with the planning process, also taking into account what's happening in commodity markets. So as a farmer is deciding what to grow into the future, we're looking at how the commodity market is shifting. So where he or she should place their bets, basically, in terms of, say, wheat or oilseed rape or barley. Then as the crop emerges from the ground, we are trying to use AI and ML to predict if something's going to happen to that crop. So we're looking at pest and disease forecasting. We're doing that on a hyper-local level, but we're using weather data, both sort of medium and long-term weather data, to predict what might happen in terms of a pest or disease that would attack that crop, so that the farmer then has an opportunity to make an intervention. And then we're looking at yield prediction, so that the farmer would know, based upon weather patterns, again, looking forward over medium to long term, what the yield is likely to be. And increasingly, obviously, the management of sustainability practices, the management of biodiversity, using ML and AI to assist in that. The Gen AI piece is relatively new, clearly, but we've brought that in. So we have a research partnership with University College Dublin, which is essentially a marriage of their School of Agriculture and their School of Computer Science. And we've developed some Gen AI models, which we've brought into our existing AI architecture. And what that's looking at is really there's like any discipline, there's a huge body of research and latest thinking around crop genetics and around crop performance and around sustainability. So, we have these crop advisors called agronomists who go on farm and they advise farmers what to do. Historically, they would be working off what's in their head. Going back even further, they used to have CDs of information that we used to push out to them, which they would review. Now with AI, they can basically crawl across curated data sets, unstructured data, and they can use that then to help them make a recommendation and a decision on farm.
Excellent. Just real quick for the audience, is anybody in financial services? So you can now imagine a large language model where you take that, pest and disease control and that weather data and you feed that into your investment, right? So you know what to invest in the next coming years. So will orange juice go up? Will this crop go down? There's some very interesting ties in that you can do with this stuff. Roisin, you mentioned both your framework and a couple of use cases. I'd like to get back to that.
Yeah, actually, I can see a little bit of a parallel in our forecasting work with what you described there. So one of the projects that we're running within the Coca-Cola company is what we're calling a suggested order. And so imagine that you are running a small bar or an independent retail outlet. Typically, people order more or less what they've ordered in previous years. And the salesperson can influence that in various ways, but typically the order is fairly consistent. What we did was we saw an opportunity using AI to use information about different environmental factors, which could actually help an outlet to know more about what was going to happen in their area and therefore what might actually influence demand. So, for instance, we're able to feed into our AI model, is there going to be a large-scale event? Is there going to be a marathon? Is there going to be a festival? Is there going to be, a spell of very hot weather, which is going to increase, people kind of going out and wanting to drink? And we can also then take in the information about what is the storage capacity of that particular outlet. So we're able to bring in a lot of environmental factors at large scale for thousands of outlets and be able to give to that individual bar or that individual small store a more informed estimate of kind of what we think their demand could be. And the nice thing about it is actually empowering the salespeople to have a dialogue, but based on quite bespoke information, as opposed to just looking like they're pushing our promotion. They're actually able to bring more localized insight, and it's actually being very well received by the outlet owners. So clearly there are two parts. There is, number one, the questions you are asking. What should be the order, but there's also the education of the AI tool, the information you're giving it. And what was interesting is we did a first round of the pilot just using straight ChatGPT. And in the English language market, that actually worked very well straight off. But in non-English language markets, where essentially the information we were scanning in terms of what events were happening, all of these kind of informative parts, it was a dismal failure, essentially, because we just weren't getting enough information and ChatGPT wasn't making the connections in the right way. So what we identified was in round two, we actually took the information that we were sort of using to educate the model and ran that through Azure translation operation. So a fairly sophisticated language model, and then redid it through ChatGPT. And actually we had a far better result. So I think the learning we took from that is, number one, that environmental information can be used. But secondly, ChatGPT alone is probably not sufficient for every use case. And actually we need to have a curated ecosystem of suppliers working together and actually we need to be working to build relationships with them. Now, clearly the big provider, I would imagine, fast forward a couple of years, our Microsoft, ChatGPT, OpenAI relationship, they will include superior language capabilities, but just, I suppose, not locking ourselves in to one single relationship and being open to the other capabilities we need in a more emerging situation has been an interesting one. So, but I can certainly see the parallels with your agronomists being able to make a recommendation. It's the same for our sales teams. Maybe one other one that people might be interested in is our revenue growth management area, which is clearly a very sophisticated capability, looking at our pricing, our promotions, and our assortment capabilities. And we are increasingly, but on a very sort of pilot basis, looking at machine learning to drive particular recommendations. And I think it's an interesting one in terms of impact on teams, because we've got very highly skilled people who do this, and in some instance the algorithm is making a recommendation, possibly for very good reason, but with multiple drivers. But it is important that that doesn't become a black box, because we need to be able to explain the recommendation at the end of the day. And I think that's probably one of the things for, I think when it came to the forecasting one, everybody understands the inputs. It's fairly intuitive and we can understand why we're getting to this answer. On some of the other areas where it's really quite sophisticated and there are so many drivers, there is a jump to sort of see, will people trust that if we don't really understand all the factors that are influencing it? So I think that there was a little bit of a contrast in terms of the experience in those two spaces.
Excellent, thank you. Tony, how can businesses address skill gaps arising from AI, from things being more automated, and ensuring that the employees that we have, or attracting new employees, are equipped for those roles?
Sure, good question. So I think there's a number of ways. So I mean, in our organisation, we're quite structured about our appraisal cycles, development goals, and things like that. So one of the ways we've tried to address those, I guess, the inevitable move of roles and change in roles, either through large language models or Gen AI or other forms of AI or automation, is to be open and honest and to talk about the fact that there's roles in the organisation that people are doing currently that likely won't exist in the future. So using those kind of internal processes, we've been, I suppose, focusing various roles on skilling up in terms of AI, even more specific things like prompt engineering, to say that you're kind of a subject matter expert in this area, but you won't be doing the doing anymore. What you may be doing is helping the machines refine their processes and be better. So some of the things that Roisin mentioned, I'd certainly echo around. We don't see that the likes of ChatGPT 3 or 4 in all use cases is sufficient, regardless of what kind of architecture, RAG, or other types of models or approaches they use to get to necessarily the end result. And certainly in our organisation, where we have a lot of regulated documents, we have a lot of cross-referencing and things like that, which does at times confuse the models, and sometimes it gives a slightly off answer and inappropriate. So we do have to fine-tune them, and we do need kind of people who understand context to do that, and to also to be kind of intelligent about what are the likely things people will ask these models and these interfaces. So we've spent a fair amount of time through various mechanisms just trying to explain that to our IT staff and educate people. We've even tried to kind of settle on kind of lexicons and kind of terminology as well, because there's so many phrases that people use, whether it be virtual agent, assistant, digital assistant. Some people, just given by how we've presented some of these models, think of it as teams, right? Because we've put some of them into Microsoft Teams and exposed them to the organization that way. So they don't know the difference between what is Microsoft Teams versus what is ChatGPT or other models. So we've tried to educate our staff around that. We've also tried to, I suppose, internally, position some of these advantages as a surrogate for search. So, if I'm a legal professional and I want to know what's in a contract, what's in a master services agreement, traditionally, it would be a manual job for somebody to search across them. Not all of them would be in a searchable format. There'd be OCR and other, things that you would need to do to make them digitized. But what we have been able to do with large language models is make, those types of activities, be a matter of minutes as opposed to days, weeks worth of work. And just kind of, I suppose, sometimes working back from the benefits to explain why we need to kind of, position our staff and have them have a different skill set has been helpful in ways that we probably couldn't have done without getting some of the benefits first as well,
Excellent. I was just in Belgium earlier this week speaking with a lawyer firm that's working on a startup, and it revolved around AI helping to speed up claims processes and autofill in things. And there was pushback from the legal community because it meant an impact to their billable hours. So they wanted to take longer so they get more money out of it. Derek.
Yeah, so I suppose in a skills gap perspective, there's probably two aspects to it for us. One is the ML AI skill set, the engineering skill set, the development skill set, which is obviously it's hard to get those people. So our approach to that is to have a central core competency around it, but then to work with, I mentioned UCD and other academics, but also to work with sort of startups in the space and have that core competency internally, which is then very, very close to our businesses. So, bringing in evangelists within our businesses who really are embracing the technology, who can translate that into use cases on the ground, that is eliminating pain points in their daily jobs, that is, helping them be more efficient, which then they carry the message into the rest of the businesses, and finding pilots and small projects that we can do with AI. We've not talked up AI internally in the business. We haven't talked it down either, but we're conscious of this sort of myth out there of like AI is coming for your job and the bots are coming and so on. So we're concerned about that. So we're tending to focus more on the efficiency gain, the benefits in specific use cases. People can see that. So the lawyer example is a good example, I think, of where you can just speed up your daily job because you're using AI to do that. So that's how we've tended to approach it. So, but I think the usual stuff around e-learning platforms and giving people the opportunity to progress, and as I said earlier, that transparency point about what we're trying to do and why we're trying to achieve that. So starting sort of small, being transparent, getting our developers close to the actual real users, and trying to take just some of the fear and the mystery out of this.
Excellent. Roisin.
So I suppose within our own teams, within digital services, there's no shortage of work to do, I think is the thing. And really what we want to make sure is that we're spending, or we're having our team spend as much time as they can with their business stakeholders, whether it's in insightful requirement gathering, really partnering with them to be in the boat with them on their day job, so in a way that they're driving adoption. What we don't really want them doing, for example, is spending hours and hours taking screenshots of a particular tool and then typing in the instructions, which is frankly what a lot of people spend a lot of time on. I suspect a lot of people in this room have at some point in their career done that. So, for example, AI is allowing us to use what we're calling a standard operating procedure bot, where essentially we have a video of the training and essentially the AI will capture the screenshots. It will take a first cut of what the user instructions should be, and then your business analysts can essentially take that first round and modify that. But essentially that doesn't mean that business analyst isn't required. It means that they can actually spend a lot more time sort of partnering with the business stakeholders to really make sure that whatever this new capability is being fully embedded in their day job, working with them on the use cases, etc. So for us, it really is a question of making sure that people's time is being spent in the way that we would really want it to be spent, and finding those enterprise solutions, even for ourselves within digital service, has been massively useful.
Wonderful, thank you. So a lot of people worry about, especially if you're talking about art, you're talking about IP, intellectual property, that there's privacy concerns in the AI market, especially when you're teaching large language models with the data. How are you navigating privacy concerns, ethical concerns around your automation? You work for public companies, shareholders have questions. How do you help do that, as well as safeguarding personal information? And have you had to go through those talks with the lawyers, with the compliance teams yet? And we'll start off with Tony.
Short answer is yes. Many hours.
Oh God, yes.
So, I mean, given that we're a regulated organization, and what we essentially do is push untested drugs into people for the first time, we're very sensitive about what we do in a general sense, and cautious by nature. Like most organizations, we realize that there's more than just hype, I suppose, around AI. That there are real benefits. But at the same time, we're not cavalier to just kind of rush in and deploy it, and we'll deal with the ramifications later. So we've spent a lot of time with our privacy folks, our security folks. That general model that we've made available to all staff, I think the first hurdle, and probably what took longer than any technical architecture and technical implementation, was the regulatory, the privacy, the legal review, the understanding of, well, hang on a second, where's our data going? Who's going to have access to it? Is it going to be available to a OpenAI or a Microsoft or anything else? And what are they going to use it for? So we spent a lot of time just navigating that. At the same time, we're trying to, I suppose, figure out our own position when it comes to an ever-changing kind of regulatory landscape as well. And at the time, there wasn't even a draft of the European AI Act, right? So we were trying to kind of somewhat predict the future ourselves, and figure out what that regulatory landscape might look like. So we have what we call an AI steerco, I guess, in effect. So we started off with defining principles. What does it mean for us? How do we ethically and responsibly want to use AI? How do we do it in a way that's explainable, which is really important. So a lot of what we do in large language models has a reference. So we say where this answer came from, so people can go back to the source. And that was quite important, even early days, to make people kind of comfortable in using the technology. And we have other kind of mechanisms to, thumbs up, this was useful information, thumbs down, no, you're off the market kind of thing as well, to help refine and improve the models over time as well. But I'd say it's it's not something that we feel that we've solved. Like we go back to DPIAs for every specific kind of use case, for every technology we want to use. I would say one thing that's helped is the proliferation of AI just in general, everyday work, right, or life. So whether you're using Netflix and you're getting recommendations, whether you're going into Microsoft Edge and seeing Copilot as you search, those things have helped people become a bit more comfortable, maybe a little less kind of sensitized to it's going to take my job, a little bit more comfortable in kind of using the technology. But it is something that you rightly say our investors, our clients, our board, they're asking questions very regularly. We have a culture of automation in the organization. So last year, as an example, through RPA and other automation mechanisms, we gave 2 million hours back to the organization. So for that achievement. Our CEO gave us the wonderful bar of doing 3.5 million hours this year. So we have, I suppose, some recognition that both automation and AI does deliver benefits. So people are not, while they're cautious and apprehensive, they are going into and reviewing use cases and candidates for AI with a kind of view to how do we do it safely, as opposed to the regulation or compliance or some other reason doesn't allow us to move forward. So I think the main thing for me is that it's always changing, the regulatory landscape, and for a while Italy didn't allow, I think, ChatGPT, and then it did, and even some of the technology landscape as well is changing so fast. So we're finding that a model like GPT 3.5 is good enough for a particular use case, but then there's another model that's cheaper and better and more accurate. So we're trying to kind of figure out not just how do we deliver these use cases, but how do we sustain these against all of that regulatory and technology kind of landscape.
Awesome. Thank you. Tony.
Derek.
Yeah, so I think from a privacy point of view, I mean, a similar experience to Tony. We've actually, I suppose, also partnered up with some of our competitors, particularly in the UK market, to establish a set of data principles, so sort of to go beyond GDPR and give reassurance, particularly to the farming community in the UK. So, and I suppose central to that is farmers' data is farmers' data. We may have access to it and so on, but it is their data, and therefore, particularly their consent in the use of that to feed our AI models is paramount, and they can withdraw that consent. Farmers are very, very interested in benchmarking, comparisons, and aggregation, and so on. So the rules around how we do that, we're very clear and transparent to them about that. But the other concern that surfaces from a privacy perspective and at board level is inadvertent data leakage out of the organisation. So people using ChatGPT perhaps to drive, to come up with an answer which is actually the wrong answer, and then using that to drive a decision, or putting a lot of company data into ChatGPT or another model because it's a quick way of getting a white paper or a presentation. And where does you've given that, you put that data into ChatGPT about your company, you've got this beautiful presentation or white paper or essay back, but what happens to that data that you've shared with that platform? So we're still sort of working that through, and that's sort of guided our framework as to how these tools should be used internally within the organization.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point about data leakage, and obviously something that most folks are focused on. You can put NDAs in place, you can put contracts in place, and you can put a regulatory and risk management framework around it as much as you can, and most folks do. But at the end of the day, yeah, if the model's wrong, you make a decision based off of it, you can't really go to a CIO and go, well, that model told me, sorry. Roisin.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have as I said at the beginning, we have a framework for, let's say, our use cases, but we also have a framework for essentially how we manage internally when it comes to AI. So, and whilst legal is one part of it, really what we're trying to do is embed a risk-based profiling element to everything we do. So the framework essentially looks at our orchestration and governance model. So, for example, how do we manage the intake of, so certain use cases are essentially self-serve and people will do them on their own, but there are others that are more sophisticated and may expose us to more risk. So we essentially have teams who will, for example, if you have millions and millions of rows of data, you may need one of our teams to kind of help you get into the back end of ChatGPT. So, for instance, we did a particular piece of work with our food service aggregators group, so your Dashmotes, Uber Eats, etc., running all of that data for where Coca-Cola products turn up. And we had to go into the back end of the tool. So essentially that's an example of where we use the orchestration and governance model. So that's one part of it. And that team we'll always be looking at, okay, in this use case that I'm being brought by the business, what are the exposures? Are we, and essentially acting as a coach to that business stakeholder to make sure that we're going through the right set of questions. Essentially, that's one. Second area of the framework is essentially the legal guardrails. So that, clearly there's a portion of that. Third area then of the framework is last mile adoption, and that's very much making sure that to your last point, that the end users are really thinking about, are there any risk exposures that they're maybe facing in using the information. What we have found useful is, maybe keeping the training wheels on in a B2B environment before we kind of move to a full business to consumer sort of model. So that can be a way of teams kind of learning as they go. Fourth area of the framework then is the partner ecosystem, and really cultivating that and making sure that we have the right checks, and that, particularly for startups that we might choose to work with, do they have the right security protocols in place if we're going to bring them into our family of suppliers. Clearly tech and data management. And the final one is use case acceleration. So we might have something that's come in through the governance and orchestration model as something that works at scale, works at a certain small level, but actually then if we expand that, on a global basis or to an entire region, are we facing an additional exposure in market B that maybe we didn't face in the pilot market? So really, I think the way we're approaching it is in that framework, constantly having a thread of risk evaluation that runs through all of those 6 areas, and kind of constantly asking the question, so that it doesn't become legal's job, it's everybody's job to really consider that question as we go through.
Excellent. We are coming into our final 10 minutes or so. So instead of our incredibly long, complicated last question, I'm going to make it an easy one for us and say, give me one thing that scares you about the adoption of AI the next 12 months, and one thing that's going to make you really, really excited. Tony.
Scares me. I don't think there's too much that scares me. I think there's based on our relatively, short experience, particularly with generative AI, we've seen a huge amount of kind of things that I'm not sure we would necessarily foresee. So, one of the reasons why we started kind of taking some of this in-house and doing it ourselves and providing these models kind of to all staff was because of those very reasons, right? Because what we were seeing was staff were going to, the web version of OpenAI and potentially putting confidential information and other things in. So we decided that we need to start kind of providing these services. People clearly want them, but in doing that analysis and seeing how people were using them, even in early days, there was things that we couldn't predict, right? So people were using them for all sorts of reasons, whether it be language translation. People were using it to, refine a message to their staff, even around Christmas time, we could see people using models to say, write me a paragraph to my team, make it more jovial, add in some stuff about Christmas. So they were using it in kind of ways that we hadn't, I suppose, necessarily anticipated. So I think there's an unknown that kind of scares me, right? So we don't know how these models and their use will evolve. One of the things, I suppose, in terms of benefits, we're seeing huge, so I don't think, if we went back, 10, 15 years ago, in our organization, we had Google search appliances. We had people who struggled to find information. We're largely thinking now about large language models as a complete surrogate for search, like that search is kind of gone in the context of the way we have been doing it to date. And the benefits that brings is huge. I think what excites me most is, and what we're starting to see more on the SaaS side, more in the likes of a ServiceNow or a SaaS platform, is that large language models are built into workflows, so they're helping you in the moment, in the context of a process, and I suppose there's an amplification effect with that as well. So it's not just helping you in that process, it's making your data better, it's making, maybe even the need, or if I think of something like a help desk scenario. So it's making the knowledge base article better. That's preventing people coming into that process in the first place, and it's helping them solve their problem before they even get into that process. And it's just driving these real efficiencies at each step of the process, and at the funnel into a process. So that's exciting, and we're trying to think of ways to move away from, I'm doing something, now I go over to the large language model and I go and do something there. We're trying to build that into a process. And I think that will be where we really get real efficiencies and real benefits to the organization.
Excellent. Derek?
It's probably both sides, two sides of the same coin in a way. It's the ROI curve. So it's, I suppose, what the scary bit is probably cost right now. This can be expensive to do. This is a huge opportunity for Microsoft and other vendors, and like if you switch on Copilot, you can't switch it off essentially. And there's a lot of push from the vendor community to really go after AI, and that generates as well demand within the business, because you got people coming to you saying, "Can we not do this?" and so the investment in it, if you don't control it. And I suppose I go back to the sort of the pilots, and I think Tony's point of trying to embed it into the workflow is really important, because otherwise, to be frank, it becomes a very expensive toy for a lot of people, and you're not getting the return. So I think the other side of the answer to the question is the return is exciting if you can monetize that. And for us, I go back to maybe some of the earlier points I made about. It's that advisory service that we provide on farm, and the more we can embed large language models into that. So when our advisor is on farm, geolocated, there's observations coming at him from satellite imagery and drones, etc. And if the large language models can be presenting content to him, which is very context sensitive in real time, then there's huge efficiencies for us in that, which would probably help us then drive revenue growth, and that's where the return will be. But you got to invest first, and then you've got the return later. And I think some of the hype around it is really around all of this stuff, like it's a Google killer and so on, which it could well be, but what's that going to mean to your bottom line? And that's the piece I think where it'd be very easy to get out of control on cost.
Excellent. Roisin?
Maybe somewhat similar to that. I think, as I said at the beginning, it can be a blessing and a curse to have the enterprise-wide access so early. So in one respect, it is immensely powerful to put that, to put those tools in the hands of literally everybody in the company. But also the sort of flip side is that, if you are a selected user who's been specially tasked, it does put more of an onus on you to kind of really think it through and deliver it. So I suppose what we need to make sure is we don't fall into a position where there can be an appetite within functions to think about AI, to talk about AI, but not really push their use cases right to the end. And so it may, and that if that happens, we're in a position where actually we're not really pushing our competitive advantage, or we're not making our return. So I think what I'm particularly excited about and avoiding that risk is having digital services very strongly as the partner to really embed themselves with the business, be in the boat with them, to kind of think, what's the business scenario we're looking at, and how can we equip you to use AI to do this? Is there another partner that we can bring in? Is there, if we go into the back end of the system, can we help you do something that isn't obvious, that you can just do in the main system? I think we have to get to that, because otherwise it can sort of be there out as a floating capability, but not one where we can really kind of hang our hat on something and say we've delivered X, Y, and Z. So we certainly have priority initiatives, but with that broad access, I think digital services are in a unique coaching position to make sure that every function can really have 2 or 3 areas where they can say, we did it, we understand it, we scaled it, and we're really embedding it into our business process, and it moves beyond an experiment.
Wonderful. So I think from some of the takeaways I've had from this panel is we need to focus on AI being an accelerator for our teams, Yes, there are some concerns, but by putting in governance the same way that we would do for any technology, any sort of new tooling that comes out, or a process, or legislation that comes out, making sure that we have our governance frameworks in place. We have to stay open and transparent about the impact of AI on our teams and the potential for there to be impact, but to guide them through that, as well as upskilling to say, hey, what this will do is remove some of the menial work that you have, or some of the high effort, low return work that you have. Let's move you to that, low effort, high return, so you're doing some of your best work and some of your exciting work. And then we have to stay fluid, as AI is the current buzzword. We are just a very short few years away from quantum computing becoming, out there and available to the masses, and that's going to change up the game again. So I would like to take a very large thank you to my panel up here today, Roisin Kelly, Tony Clarke, and Derek Wilson. Thank you so much for joining me.